Greetings friends, it's me Wayman, and this is like the fourth time I tried to do this video. It's pretty tough because I kind of been out of New Testament research for some time, and I'm kind of rusty. But I decided to start up the Paul series once again, because I've gotten some private PMs about it, and some people asked me about it. So we'll get started, and I'm going to start right where I left off. And in this video, we're going to be discussing the nature of Paul's letters, and we're going to be using a wide variety of sources. First of all, we're going to be using the New Testament, a historical introduction to the early Christian writings by Bart Ehrman, and also from Ehrman's the New Testament and other early Christian writings, a reader. So this is an excellent book if you can pick it up, used or brand new. He gives a really good introduction to the beginning of text of the New Testament and pseudepigraphal text, and it's pretty good reader. Also, we're going to be using the writings of St. Paul, a Norton Critical Edition, and that's a really good book. Also Paul, The Mind of the Apostle by A.N. Wilson, just for another view. Also, The Changing Faces of Jesus by Giza Vermes. And we're using this book simply because we're trying to understand how the religion of Jesus became a religion about Jesus by the Apostle Paul. And also, from the Catholic point of view, there's an excellent commentary on it's called the New Jerome Biblical Commentary. I use it quite a bit, and they're fairly honest about New Testament scholarship, not all that biased from what I've seen. So we're going to be using that. So to start out, I just wanted to read what Ehrman has to say about the occasional nature of Paul's letters, and then maybe we'll look at the Norton Critical Edition and see how Paul used some apologetics and the way he wrote to validate his apostleship and validate his message among all the other Hellenistic moralists that were out there. So it's kind of humorous. And when we get into the video on 1 Thessalonians, which was probably written down maybe around 50 B.C., and is probably one of the earliest pieces of Christian literature, and if things were in historical order, maybe Thessalonians would be right up there in front. Because as we know, in the construction of the biblical text today, the Bible, New Testament, is not in historical order. But we're going to go through the letters of Paul in historical order, because I personally believe it's important to see historically, how his views changed and how his views evolved, which is huge. So here Bart Ehrman talks about the Apostle Paul's letters and the occasional nature of Paul's letters. This is on page 291 in his textbook, The New Testament, A Historical Introduction to the Early Christian Writings. Probably the most important insight into the Pauline epistles in modern scholarship is that all of them are occasional. Paul's letters are not essays written on themes or systematic treatises that discuss important issues of theology. They're actual communications to particular individuals and communities sent through the ancient equivalent of the mail. With all but one exception, Paul wrote these letters to address problems that arose in Christian communities he established. In every case, they are occasioned by situations that he felt compelled to address as an apostle of Christ. Because of the occasional nature of these letters, they do not contain everything that we may want to know about Paul and his views, since he is addressing issues that have come up in the communities that he founded. Then beliefs, practices, and perspectives that are not at issue will not be addressed, even when these were of central importance to Paul. As numerous scholars have noted, if Paul had not taken exception to the way the Corinthians were celebrating the Lord's Supper, we would never have known that he even supported or knew of the practice. Another implication of the occasional nature of Paul's letters is that if we want to approach them from a historical perspective, then we need to learn about the occasions that lie behind them. And I want to say here that a lot of people, they do not take the time to study the occasions behind why Paul wrote the letters. Just want to stress that. And that gives them the license to twist the theological letters or the theological ideas of Paul into almost anything they want. Each of these books has a specific historical setting, a real-life context. If we misconstrued the context or pretend that it never existed, we change what the book means. For this reason, we will be applying the contextual method to the Pauline epistles as we did with the Johnnian literature. For each writing, we will begin by looking for clues as to the historical circumstances that prompted Paul to produce it, or at least the circumstances as he appears to have perceived them. Of course, in every case, we have only Paul's side of the argument, but the context method will help us understand why he says, in the light of the way he appears to have constructed the context. We should not assume, however, that this perception of the situation was necessarily shared by the people he addressed. So, when we get into the text of Thessalonians, you'll see this happening. And you'll see that some of the problems that Paul addressed were quite interesting indeed. And not all the followers viewed the literature and the theological ideas the same way he did. So, getting into the writings of St. Paul, the Norton Critical Edition, I just wanted to read this one section on the Hellenistic philosophers. There is no evidence that a personal attack on Paul had been made by anybody in Thessalonica. The antithetical statements are rather typical of those by Hellenistic philosophers and prophets sought to present themselves as trustworthy moral guides by distinguishing themselves from the numerous charlatans who claimed the same vocations. Paul's extensive use in 1 Thessalonians of the techniques and traditions of the Hellenistic moralists shows that he presupposes that his readers will be sufficiently familiar with the commonplaces of popular philosophy to understand the nuances of his various exhortations and instructions. So here, Paul, because these were educated class of people, pagans, had his work cut out for him almost everywhere he went. And he almost had to talk like a Greek philosopher to get him to believe the things that he was preaching. Paul said that he was all things to all people so that he could convert. And so you can see him transform through each letter, turning into just that. And it's pretty amazing indeed. So in the next video on Paul, we'll give a short introduction on the letter of Thessalonians and like the background and the year, and then we'll kind of read something on the context of it so we can better understand it, and then we'll get into a commentary on it. And you can follow along too in your biblical text, whatever one you want, and send in your videos, whether critical or you agree with me, and let me know how you enjoy the series. So take care, friends, and remember, if everybody's thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking.